Welcome to you all. I'm thrilled that you're interested in this topic. Of course, all of us are interested, and that's why we're on this panel. I'm Sally Benson. I'm a faculty member in the Energy Resources Engineering Department, and I joined Stanford in 2007. And until last year in September, I was also the co-director of the Stanford Precourt Institute for Energy. And today we have an incredible group of panelists lined up for you. And to kick things off, what I'd like to just do is go through the group and they will give you introductions to themselves to set the stage. So let's start with Andreas.
Hi, I'm Andreas Fornwald. I'm originally from Germany, but when I graduated in 2009 with Katie, I promised her to come to Texas. So then after a couple of years, I made it, and now I'm living in Texas, Houston, and I'm very happy to be here. My background, I started as an electrical engineer commissioning gas turbines, and my first visit to Texas was 1998 when I worked with my German company, with Enron, a great company, defunct unfortunately in Houston, my first stint in Houston. I like the area, I like Texas, and I continued my career until with Siemens till I joined the Sloan program. And after graduating from Sloan, I used to work as an executive for private equity portfolio companies. And currently I'm working, and Katie will like it again, for private equities from Chicago. You may know Chicago too. And we are investing in wind generation here in Texas. So a pretty interesting environment. And so I got to know what's going on here with the grid and how the things work in Texas. I can tell. Great to be in Texas, but some things have to be improved.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Apoorv.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Apoorv Parghava. I was Stanford 17. I got my MBA and my MS in Energy and Resources from Stanford. Sally was actually kind enough to be my advisor whilst I was there for my MS thesis. I am wearing my GSB T-shirt because I had to wear something Stanford branded for something like this. I run a company called Winterizing. I'm the co-founder and CEO. We basically work with electric utilities to ensure that the electrification of transportation, basically we try to enable the future of electric transportation in such a way such that the grid can also handle all these new EVs coming onto the grid. And I actually went to college in Texas, so lived there for 4 years and then continued working there in energy afterwards. So pretty familiar with the grid situation in Texas as well, and I'm excited to share more about sort of solutions. Thanks so much.
Okay, terrific. Nisha.
Hello, I'm Nisha Desai. I'm in Houston, Texas. Started my career as a management consultant serving oil and gas and utility companies. Went to business school, not at Stanford, I went to Harvard. So welcome to my HBS colleagues, and thank you very much for inviting me to sit on this panel, to the Stanford alumni crew. I came to Houston to work for this little company called Enron. Andreas already mentioned it, so and some of you may remember it. Went from Enron into one of the startups that Enron was launching, and then I left to go join another startup, and somehow, for the most part, had managed to make a career in startups and innovation associated with the energy sector. So I've spent a lot of my time doing that in Texas. I've been involved with solar, energy storage, big data, oil and gas services. So just a lot of different things. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Annuity Holdings, and we're trying to disrupt the way that individuals purchase clean energy with the concept of an energy annuity. So, and thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, terrific. Oscar, finally we'll go to you.
I'll keep it short and sweet, Sally. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Oscar Mascarenas, Master's in Energy Resources Engineering, formerly known as Petroleum Engineering in 1999, and another Master's in Management Science and Engineering in 2005. I'm based in Houston, Texas. And I work in energy infrastructure innovation, primarily in gas and renewables, as well as carbon removal. So that's my area of focus right now. And in energy, I've worked at the Global Climate and Energy Project at Stanford that Sally used to head, as well as I've had a 15-year career at ExxonMobil, delivering energy projects globally in low carbon power, as well as gas. So that's my background.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so just to let you know the plan, so we have an organized conversation for about half an hour, and then we're going to open it up to all of you for questions. And please, again, type them into the chat. And you can go ahead and start typing in questions now. And when we go to that part, I'll go back and look through all the questions you've put in so far. Okay, so let's set the stage that, over the last year, we've experienced systemic power failures in both Texas and California. And in both cases, it was just when we needed the electricity most, or that the grid came to the brink of failure. And in particular, in February of this year, the state of Texas experienced unprecedented extreme cold weather. And the electricity infrastructure could just not handle the extreme cold, causing a catastrophic situation for the people in Texas. Over 4.5 million people had their power cut off, 151 died, water pipes froze and burst, leaving people without water for days. And the true cost of these events have yet to be determined, but estimates are in the order of $100 billion. So to discuss what happened and how to prevent it from happening again, our four distinguished alumni, and we'll include Harvard as a distinguished alumni, are going to share their perspective on what went wrong and how to fix it. So to begin with, let's learn more about what actually happened. And we'll start with you, Andreas. As you said, you spent your career working on power systems and lived through the Texas power grid failure. So we're hoping that, you can explain what happened. And for those of you who weren't in Texas at the time, what was it like to live through it firsthand? And so why don't you take it away?
I'm happy to take. So if you allow me, I would like to share screen to show you some graphs. And here is how it looks like. And I hope you can see it. That's the graph. And that's what happened in Texas. So it was a rapid decrease in generation, which caused a frequency drop. And if the frequency drops below 59.4, where we have to stop the grid because that's become dangerous and all the protection equipment stop. And that's how it come. So we have it happen in literally in minutes, 123, and that's an official graph from ERCOT, the till 153, where we have this critical moment. And then they had to go out on the rolling blackout. That was because we didn't have enough capacity in Texas. And I will show another graph, that's the Texas, and that's the power which was impacted by this power generation failure. So we had all of them: coal, natural gas, solar, wind. And you see where the points are, that's where all the power drop came from. And it's all over the place, especially we had frozen wind turbines, but we also had gas. And I would like to debunk two myths which we see around Texas and which we hear from the press. First of all, grid capacity and interconnectivity. Grid capacity and interconnectivity exist in Texas, and Texas grid is not insulated, like probably you heard from many press outlets. It's connected to New Mexico, it's connected to Louisiana, to Kansas, and also to Mexico itself. So the grid, the Texas grid, is actually, from my point of view as an electric engineer, a great grid which can withstand far more demand than what we have in February. You probably know that in Texas in July and August, we have temperatures over 100, and I'm sure my friends from Houston know it very well, but also from Austin, and that's a far higher consumption than what we had in February. So it wasn't particularly the grid. Then we heard about the second myth. What I want to debunk is the frozen wind turbines, and I'm working actually on this project. The wind turbines were just a small part of the capacity which were lost. So 7% of the lost capacity, that's according to my data, were wind turbines that were lost. So the frozen wind turbine, yes, it happened, but that was not the trigger to the whole blackouts. And that's what I want to say. So if we look for the problem here, it's not looking for renewable or fossil, it's actually looking for a broader problem, how we handle the grid. And the grid is there, and we had actually enough capacity in Texas. It's just my opinion, my personal opinion is how we handle this capacity.
Okay, thank you. So, so maybe you can stop sharing your screen, and Nisha, let's turn to you. You've made the point that it was not just a technological failure, but that there were regulatory and policy issues. Could somebody put their thing on mute? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Nisha. So regulatory and policy issues also contributed to ending up in this situation. Can you describe that?
Yes, absolutely. So the thing that probably has the most attention is the structure of the market design in Texas, in ERCOT, right? And there's a lot of discussion about the fact that ERCOT, the way it's designed, is an energy-only market. So the market is designed to have these really high power prices of $9,000 a megawatt hour, which are supposed to be able to encourage new generation to be there and be available at times when the grid is stressed, to be able to capture this scarcity pricing, so to speak. So, so obviously we had prices at $9,000 a megawatt hour for several days in a row, and it didn't stop the blackout. So we did definitely, have a market design issue that we need to figure out how to tweak, because that obviously didn't provide the incentives for some of the root causes which are identified, which is kind of the winterization and having the power plants able to avoid freezing instruments and things like that. So the problem is, again, in this kind of market design, I mean, most people don't expect $9,000 prices to last for several days, but they don't actually expect it to last very many times at all. And it really doesn't create the right set of incentives for power plants to invest the extra money that they need to be able to withstand that kind of temperature. But so that's market design on the electricity side. I'd like to talk about, though, what is market design on the gas supply side? Right. So, we think about, electricity systems as one where, it's designed to meet, a certain level of reliability. But, to the extent that natural gas is a critical source of fuel for many of these power plants, we don't really have the same level of scrutiny and attention to, what is the reliability of the natural gas supply. And certainly we see that there were many issues in the gas supply in terms of freeze offs, for example, upstream at the wellhead, pipelines that didn't have redundancy in their operations. So they were electric only compressors. And when the power grid failed, they really didn't have backup fuel to continue to supply gas. And so, we can go on and on a little bit. There's certainly a lot of communication failures, but then we take it up and say, all right, look, we've got these very interdependent systems. And the power supply, the power system, we've got a public utility commission that regulates that. right, kind of sets standards. And we've got the ERCOT, which is the ISO, which kind of, is responsible for kind of keeping the grid up. But when it comes to the fuel supply, the fuel, parts of it are regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission, which is, by the way, they both sit in the same building in Austin, and they don't communicate, right? You can't actually have the commissioners communicate with each other without potentially violating some Open Meetings Act. The organizations are set up very differently. One body is elected pretty much by the industry. The other body is appointed by the governor. And so, you really have, very disparate kind of regulatory mechanisms for two very, very interdependent systems. And I actually been a little bit vocal several weeks ago, just suggesting that maybe we should be thinking about, combining some of the regulatory institutions. So another thing I will say, though, which is from a policy side, Texas does not have very high standards for energy efficiency. In fact, our building codes, they're kind of the worst in the country when it comes to encouraging energy efficiency. And if you think about it, we had a climate event which all of a sudden increased the demand for electricity to higher than the hottest day in August that we've ever experienced. And that's really because, there's all of a sudden a lot of demand from buildings that are leaking heat like a sieve because they really didn't have, kind of codes built in to put in basic energy efficiency. So in my mind, I think that there's, failures on the policy side around, just demand management, basically pushing it all onto the supply side, but then only really being thinking about, kind of the electricity system as being the one that has to bear the burden for all of the resilience types of activities without really having regulatory structures that enable different systems to work together.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you. So Oscar and Apoorv, any other thoughts from your perspective of sort of what went wrong? And I know that Oscar, I think you were also in Houston at the time. Do you want to sort of share, for those people who weren't in Texas?
I think no, absolutely, Sally. Thanks for that. I think Nisha and Andreas have covered things quite well. I'll just build on that. So again, Nisha correctly pointed out that the natural gas production system and the electricity grid are actually interdependent. So they're not redundant. So a failure in one of them leads to a failure in the other. And then you have this cascading failure effect, or a death spiral, if you will. So what essentially happened in the natural gas, from a technical system standpoint, in the natural gas production was well freeze-offs, gathering line freezes, as well as compression was powered by the electric grid, which failed. So that's one key issue. And roughly half the production was offline. So in a future system, in terms of priority of the electric supply, the electric priority should be given to the production of natural gas because it feeds into the electric grid. I think that was a mismatch as well. Furthermore, we're also seeing a lot of renewable generation power, oil and gas operations. So when the wind turbines went down, which was quite a bit, I want to say at least 15 gigawatts, that affected a lot of the pumping and compression with the natural gas system. So I'll just add to that. But fundamentally, what Nisha pointed out is absolutely correct. In Texas's system that has really high power prices to incentivize capacity, it doesn't work because it's very difficult to predict and difficult for a baseload power generator like a gas plant to plan for that adequately or invest in capacity. So we have to introduce either through a resiliency mandate or a capacity fee or both that resilience into the incentive system, both for renewables as well as gas. Because right now it's just a marginal cost dispatch model, and it just doesn't work for these kinds of events.
Thanks. Yes, Apoorv, do you want to add anything?
Very, very quickly. I mean, I think everyone's sort of covered a lot of the topics that I would probably mention. I'll just say I live in California in the Bay Area, and I will say that a lot of the interagency challenges that Nisha was describing in Texas are actually not just a Texas problem. That's frankly a large part of the reason that we had issues out here in California as well. It was frankly interagency coordination challenges between CAISO, which is the ISO, the sort of transmission and generation operator here in California, the CPUC, which is the Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission. So there's many different agencies, as you can already tell, and that leads to interagency problem. The one last very quick thought I'll add, and especially because I just saw a question kind of come in that kind of talked about this, is that there's this question or this increasing conversation that's starting to happen around, we just need better weather forecasting. If we just have better weather forecasting, it'll manage. And I think if you add in, if you recognize that weather is merely a subcomponent of overall climate forecasting, I think the bigger challenge here is that our existing systems aren't really built to deal with climate risk and haven't got the requisite amount of climate resiliency built into them, because these are increasingly going to be events we're going to see. We will see, I mean, you know, I lived in Houston for many years and I have a lot of friends and family still there. We're seeing more and more 1 in 100-year floods, right? And things like that. Well, you can't have 5 or 10 100-year floods in 10 years, you know, that doesn't make any sense anymore. So I think given that the risk profile is changing, right, I think there is a certain amount of resiliency that the system doesn't currently have baked in, nor have we found a way in current market design or current market structure to fit into the construct. And so I think that we need to re-explore how we price that value, the value essentially of resiliency. And that's a conversation I think that's been happening across the country, not just in Texas. And yes, that's a great point. There are problems even defining resiliency, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks. So just a little more on a follow-up on this. So, you know, in the newspapers, we read about people, you know, getting bills, $5,000 electricity bills, you know, and being completely shocked. I mean, I guess, is that true, or it's just stuff we heard in the newspaper? And, you know, and what does somebody do with the $5,000 bill? Can they spread it out over a whole year, or yeah, anything on the billing?
I have no doubt that happened. I personally don't know anybody in Austin who had that sort of an experience. I was very nervous to see what our bills were going to look like after that.
But I mean, if I can just add, I think Austin has a regulated utility. So Austin Energy is very different from public retail, you know, retailers in the rest of Texas, where especially companies like Griddy could actually do things like that and pass on wholesale costs to their customers. So there are differences in market design even within Texas.
So a quick, go ahead, Nisha.
And I will say, for example, I mean, you've got Brazos Electric Cooperative as an example. So it is exposed to these real-time prices. It had to declare bankruptcy because it really didn't have a way of having its members pay those charges that were incurred. But yeah, so it is important to recognize, like in ERCOT, there are areas that used to be the purview of the investor-owned utilities, and those were opened up to retail competition. Now, the municipals, for example, like City of Austin, they run their own electric utility. CPS Energy San Antonio, they run their electric utility. So they don't have competition. But within the competitive market, that was designed to try and introduce innovation in terms of what is being offered to customers. And so Griddy is an example. Griddy, by the way, they had less than 30,000 customers that out of 7 million that have the ability to select their own retail electricity provider. And so they were the ones that, you know, were attracted by this idea of getting wholesale power. So here's the thing. And that is an example of where, again, the risk is poorly understood, right? So you look historically, and sure, we had massive price spikes a couple of years ago, which caused Griddy to lose a lot of customers. But there were less than 30,000 customers. They actually stayed with Griddy, right? They were like, okay, well, even though my August bill was ridiculous, they saved money the rest of the year. And so what nobody really understood, whether it was Griddy or whether it was the customers they were serving, was like really kind of the magnitude of volatility in a crisis, and then the likelihood of that crisis actually happening. So.
That's right. And it also depends on the contracts. As I am here in the Woodlands, we never had this problem. And the Woodlands is basically Centerpoint and Entergy. So depend on the contracts. I heard about Sugarland, I heard about Brazos, but here in the north part, it didn't spike the price. They have different agreements here.
But well, let's look at CPS Energy San Antonio, right? So of course, their customers' bills haven't increased, but they've already said that they're going to have to be paying for these extra costs that they incurred over, I don't know, it was 20 or 25 years. And those ultimately have to get passed through to customers' rates. So it's basically, they're just going to be paying for them over decades rather than over days.
Yes,
Okay.
so
Customers still pay for them.
So probably you heard that Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway is proposing an investment in Texas with additional gas turbines, LM5 6000 from GE, to compensate for this capacity markets. And they are looking to get a deal. I don't know the details, but they are negotiating. I know it from my native Germany. There was a big conversation, and at that time I was there advising on some politicians in Berlin, and it never materialized. So it's a very complicated thing, but actually my opinion is if you want to have, you need quick assets like gas turbine, which can be up to speed in 3 to 6 minutes, and you need to put it like an insurance fee or something that pays these assets and share between them.
All right. Well, I think we're going to move on, but clearly a lot of complexity there. And well, thank you. So I want to move on to solutions now. Each of you is involved in one way or another in innovative solutions for making the power grid more resilient, cleaner, reliable. And so what are the solutions we need now, so this never happens again in Texas, but more broadly, that it never happens again anywhere. And let's start with you, Oscar.
Thanks, Ali. So the one interesting way to look at this is from the customer view. And so look at resilience, starting with the customer rather than the system. And what I've been working on recently is multi-resource microgrids that's taking solar, batteries, and then adding gas and thermal energy to the equation to provide the redundancy and efficiency in terms of providing energy services. So this is similar to the, what is not a new idea, cogen model, but what it does is it combines resiliency through redundancy as well as energy services. So if you think about in Houston, the Texas Medical Center has a 50 megawatt microgrid that worked, trouble-free during both Harvey as well as during the deep freeze. And they, in fact, are resilient against flooding as well. So that's another example. From the consumer level, I think solar and home batteries are adequate for critical loads, especially in places like California. But when you get to buildings, critical systems like hospitals, data centers, grocery stores, you need the power density and energy density. I think that there's where gas plays a role. You could use the waste heat for really high efficiency applications. So another example is we've been looking to develop this in India. One of the district level solutions is a 186 megawatt tri-generation microgrid providing cooling, heating, and electricity. And they're able to shave off at least 100 megawatts of peak demand and run the whole system at 85% efficiency. That's pretty incredible if you pair that with the cheap natural gas in the US that we have here. But we're seeing this, this microgrid resiliency sort of hit a tipping point now because, the key innovation has been the controllability behind the meter, demand side management, and controllability of these different components to intelligently switch in and out and provide not only resiliency and efficiency, but grid services like peak shaving, time of use arbitrage, as well as backup. So I think this is one interesting resilient solution. The other one, Sally, and I'll quickly cover it, is carbon capture and storage. And I know this has been talked about for a very long time, but I think there too we're hitting a point where there's a lot of impetus. The incentives are coming through, and combined with emerging technologies like hydrogen, as well as the need to decarbonize heavy industry. And Sally, you've been working this. There's the opportunity to build these at scale through hubs and clusters. We see this being done in Europe already now, in the UK and Netherlands, where you've got green hydrogen through offshore wind, blue hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage of gas-fired power plants, all connected in a hub where the costs are spread out and the marginal cost of entry is quite low. So I think that can play a role. And why that is helpful for resilience is it allows these long-lived, extremely high-density power generation assets like gas-fired power to be amortized over a long period of time and provide carbon-free baseload as well as peaking service to the grid. Battery storage is a solution, hydrogen is a long-term solution, but they're pretty expensive for scale, especially for long-duration events. So I've covered those two, and the last one is what Andreas pointed out, is mobile power that can be targeted in case of an outage. So this ranges from the tens of megawatts, gas turbines, to hundreds of megawatts through floating power solutions through barges and ships. So these can be brought in an emergency in a district level, county level, and spun up within minutes. So I think that allows a better capacity of response services that cities and counties should pay attention to and invest in. We've seen them being applied in Kobe after the earthquake, in Japan, in Puerto Rico for the city of San Juan. So they can be very, very effective, I think, for disaster recovery, because a number of things can cause problems: earthquakes, hurricanes, and all kinds of things. So those are the three solutions, Sally, that I wanted to talk about, that I've worked in my career as well.
Okay, well, fantastic. So Apoorv, looking to the future, we're going to be more dependent on the electricity grid than ever. Electric vehicles, electric heating, are going to make reliability even more important. And at the same time, these are really large loads that we're going to be adding to the grid, and they're going to really stress, the system we have and require investment in future infrastructure. So I know you're working on solutions to keep the grid reliable, even when we pile up all these loads. So can you tell us more about what you're doing and why you think it will help?
Yeah, sure. I think from our perspective at WaveGrid, we think a lot about the first big electrification trend, which is transportation. And I think in particular, as you think about transportation, I think it further, and heating is the same, but definitely I think transportation further kind of solidifies the same challenge, which is that these have become critical loads, right? You can't have a situation where the power goes out and now you can't drive your car or your truck or whatever because there's no more power anymore. But I think we have a tendency, which is to of course fixate on massive outage events like this one in Texas, where the reality is there are a series of other reliability and resiliency challenges that we have to think about, particularly at the micro level. And so what we do at WaveGrid is we really try to think about both transportation as its own system, electricity as its own system, and the convergence of these two systems into one integrated and increasingly integrated system. And what that means from a forecasting, planning, prediction, and then of course, management problem, right? So how can you take all these vehicles that are coming on, that are giant batteries on wheels, essentially, and how can you leverage them to not just cause extra strain on the grid, but actually turn into a much more valuable grid asset? Can you use the vehicles charging in an intelligent way such that they're actually better utilizing the existing network that we've already invested in, where they're actually absorbing excess renewables in the middle of the night or the middle of the day, And as we saw with the Ford 150 yesterday that was announced, the electric Ford 150, maybe you can turn it back into an actual battery that powers your house during an outage. And so there are a lot of solutions that are being developed at an individual product level. The F-150, I think it can provide 3 to 4 days of backup power now if you install it with the requisite panel. But whilst it may solve the individual's problem, the big question that we keep asking ourselves is, how do we solve the systems challenge that comes with this, right? Because again, resiliency, reliability, these are not just I buy a car or I put a solar panel on my roof, so I don't really care what happens to the neighborhood around me or the city around me or the state that I'm in or the grid I'm in. All of those things are interconnected. Like ultimately, not to sound too hippie-ish about this, but this is truly the one thing that interconnects us all. And so we have to be very careful about the grid reliability and resiliency. And what we really try to do at WeaveGrid is provide the tools and services to grid operators that allow them to say, look, we're going through a massive transition in both energy and transportation. We can actually forecast and manage those problems as they come.
It's interesting. The F-150 was a poster child during this outage of people using their pickup trucks running to power their homes. It's kind of interesting that you brought that up. But go ahead, Isha.
Yeah, so you've said some interesting things about, for example, if someone's putting solar panels on the roof or buying the F-150, that they're getting their own resilience. But I think this is where, and kind of going back to the question that Sally had asked me around kind of tech policy types of structures and regulatory type of structures, like how do you allow the grid values of that to kind of to benefit the rest of the grid, right? So while you might say, okay, so one person buys a solar panel and they're more resilient, how about when one person doesn't buy a solar panel, right?
Absolutely.
That's also, if nobody had solar panels, then without then we wouldn't be able to capture the value of virtual power plants and grid services that can come from distributed resources, and be able to use that to support kind of the local microgrid, or even the bigger macrogrid, right? So I think we really have to be thinking about as well those technology and policy, like how do the policy market designs and the technologies kind of go together. One thing that we really definitely need to be thinking about is consumer empowerment, right? Not just so that they can be their island, but that they are also encouraged to be able to have those resources that they've invested in, again, for their own benefit, also be able to be used to give back to the grid.
Okay, thanks. Andreas, do you have any other thoughts on solutions?
Yes, I would like to put one number, which is astonishing. 2016, Texas spent $2 billion more on maintenance and service in energy assets than 2020. So the utilities and the power generators in Texas were squeezed because of this competition in price on operation, maintenance, and service. So the OMS costs went down by $2 billion. That's a big number. $2 billion less service. We now here, and I'm with my private equity groups, we are now negotiating with 3 service providers for wind turbine in Texas, which are on Chapter 11. They actually should be thriving. They are on Chapter 11 because the utilities and all the producer could not pay their bills. That's astonishing. And if you drive the 77, and probably Katie know, the 77 down to Brownsville, you see a lot of wind turbines. That's one of the most windy regions in the United States. And more than 10% are not rotating because they're broken. So service and maintenance has to, in my opinion, has to be more in focus. And that's for my perspective as an engineer.
The margins are very tight as well. And, we've had this conversation about winterization of all these assets. For wind, especially, especially with the problem of icing, it's going to be very difficult to winterize those just because there's just not enough margin in there for that type of resource. Much easier on the gas side, both from the production side as well as the power plants.
If I may add here, Oscar, we went to Chicago where my partners are in Elgin and Geneva, Chicago, and out in Minnesota. The wind turbines are working perfect. Actually, a wind turbine is working better in lower temperature because of the air density than in warm temperature as in Texas. And you may know, everybody probably saw when you are flying to north of United States, when you are on the tarmac with the plane, they have to put hot water on your wings on the plane that the plane can start and pick up. That same happens to the blades of the wind turbine. They get so much ice that they cannot rotate because they are not winterized and they do not have heating.
So but those were designed before they were built. That it's hard to retrofit is what I was.
No,
some things can be done, but
it's actually easy, and I can show the solution for who is interested. A winterizing of a wind turbine, and sorry for the misspelling because the words are so, cost less than 40K, complete package.
Okay. As a retrofit?
Yes, you have to put heating inside the blades. Somebody goes up, put the heating inside the blades, connected to the generator, and it works.
I got a quote of 400,000. I think I'm missing a zero, Andreas.
No, that's bullshit.
Okay, well,
people want to change the blades. They're selling you new blades. We change nothing.
Agreed.
Okay.
I looked this up.
Like
so that's an interesting.
Some good solutions. What I'm going to suggest is our time is going very quickly, and we do have questions. So I just want to, the rest of the time, we'll go through the questions, and then I'm going to give you at the end each an opportunity to say something for a minute or so. But first, let's go to some of these questions so we can engage the whole group. And I'm going to just start with the first one. What's the chance that advanced nuclear, is going to, get inexpensive enough and easy enough to permit that it will be able to contribute to, low carbon, reliable power? Anybody have any thoughts on advanced nuclear?
I come from a country which they banned nuclear, basically. Germany will shut down 2024, the last nuclear power plant. And in my opinion, it's a mistake. Nuclear is, if it's well maintained and with the right service and the right operation, it's a wonderful baseload of power generation for baseload. It should be done.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just offer a thought on that too. There's a lot of innovation going on in that space. There's a lot of good reason to believe that, we will be able to make smaller, less expensive nuclear plants. But I don't think it's going to be in the, I'd be surprised if we see these scaling before at least 15 years from now. But we're still going to have plenty to do 15 years from now. So that's kind of my guess. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to another one. Interconnects. Should ERCOT be more interconnected with its neighbors? Upsides, downsides. Any thoughts on that?
Just have a quick thought, Sally, and Andreas probably knows more about this, but building transmission infrastructure has always proven to be tricky. So complete integration with the rest of the system is probably many years and many billions of dollars too far away. I'll just add that because it's not in my backyard, permitting and all that goes along with major infrastructure elements like transmission lines, pipelines. So it seems to be an expensive proposition. I'll let Andreas add to that.
Yeah, I agree, Oscar, and probably everybody knows from the news the Keystone pipeline. So building a transmission line is, from the complexity and from the infrastructure and investment, not far away from a pipeline. So it's very costly, especially if we talk about high
but there are developers that are working on it. And, I think that that is a bit of a nuanced question, right? So right now, ERCOT the interconnections are limited to other areas. There are these DC ties. And what they do is they really allow kind of ERCOT to be isolated, but it does limit the ability to import and export power between the regions. And so, you know, there are some political or kind of regulatory
market. Yeah.
Some might argue benefits, some might argue costs associated with that, in that ERCOT transmission development within ERCOT is not FERC jurisdictional. And so what happens, right, is without having to deal with federal regulation, Texas has been incredibly successple in transmission development, right? The CREZ lines, these competitive renewable energy zones, these are lines that were able to be built, right? Otherwise, it's notoriously, again, yes, it's notoriously difficult to permit linear.
That really helped wind power in particular.
It helped power. It helped basically open up a very, very resource-rich area.
Yeah.
But load poor and basically allow the movement of that natural resource to serve consumers in the rest of Texas. So, you know, is there opportunity to open up the interconnect? Absolutely. You know, and there are developers who are working on that, you know, that would allow you know, more wind actually to be developed in Texas and then exported to other states. There is the political argument in terms of how much interconnection do you have with the rest of the country before FERC says that they want to put their authority over Texas. And I was not born here, but you know, there is something that I definitely appreciate about the ability to get stuff done here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a balance.
So I want to add here, and I have the comparison to German grid, which is supposed to be one of the top, probably second only to Swiss grid in Europe. And I can say Texas grid is, in one word, excellent from the technical point of view.
Okay, we're going to, a quick answer to a technical question, if we can manage that. Okay, so how much of the frequency drop in the first few cycles was do you attribute to power shortages as compared to reduced system inertia associated with the renewables on the grid? And in the questions, could synthetic inertia and damping have been helpful? Or was it really just a capacity problem?
I would say the majority is power shortage, because the
majority was power shortage.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great. Okay. Next question. Should ERCOT have a capacity market? Anyone can answer this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. They have to have an element. They have to have that element in there.
So we could, so I don't disagree in terms of, you know, let's think about how do we put in greater incentives for resilience. But we can look at capacity markets in the rest of the country. PJM has a capacity market. PJM had blackouts in the last polar vortex, right? So, you know, the capacity market is not something that's going to prevent blackouts. What it is very effective at doing is basically putting more steel in the ground. But the more steel in the ground by itself doesn't necessarily result in greater resilience. So if we're really looking for reliability and resilience, then we really need to be thinking about how do we design for that. It's not necessarily a capacity market. There's a guy named Rob Gramlich. He's got like white papers on capacity. He is an expert on capacity markets. So he's got a lot of evidence that says that they don't necessarily do a better job in improving resilience.
It's sort of a hybrid model. I'd add that this, you know, the regulatory system should mandate resilience on the part of renewables as well, and that will sort of incentivize storage, more storage coming online. So right now it's just supply cost dispatch. There is no resilience requirement for renewable generation, which there should be, I think. So I'm sort of flipping the argument around a little bit. And we have to design the right instrument. So I'm kind of with Nisha there. You can't sort of pick what standalone solutions, capacity or dispatch.
And we should also enable a wide variety of resources to compete for that, right? You know, I mean, if I think about what happened in the blackout, when my power was wrested away from me, I was not paid $9,000 a megawatt hour, right? whereas there were other entities that participate in demand response programs, and they were paid to reduce their consumption or get off the grid, right? So we need to be thinking about, like, how do we enable a wide variety of resources to be able to also kind of act as a brake on capacity markets, and so it's not just more steel in the ground, but it could be more effective, right? Hey, all those people who are board F-150s, right? Giving them the incentive to feed some of that power back into the grid when necessary.
If I may add here something, we need a capacity market, in my opinion, to work like a fire department, but we cannot pay the capacity market by the number of fires they extinguished. We have to pay them a certain fee, like the fire department. So
it's a really good question. How do we get people to pay for insurance, right? Because I mean, like, and Texas is notoriously bad for people, paying for insurance. And that's a very good question.
I think we're going to have to wrap up right now. So I want to give you each an opportunity to make a final remark, and we'll start with Andreas. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So my final remark is, we have a great grid in Texas because it's a great state. It makes sense, but technically it's great. It's about how to structure the capacity market. It's a regulatory issue, and I will give it that to Nisha, but technically we are there, and it's more management and structure, in my opinion.
Okay, Apurv.
I mean, I'd agree a lot with what Andreas was also saying, which is that there's obviously the grid itself is fine. It's a good grid. There's lots of really compelling aspects of the electric grid and ERCOT market design in Texas. I think when you look at every major energy question today, it's a combination of what can technology, policy, and the financing infrastructure do to tackle the challenges we have. And that goes all the way from trying to reduce emissions to solving for resiliency. And I think if you don't have all three of those lenses looking deeply at these questions, we have a tendency to overfixate and say, I like my thing, I make a really great thing, please buy my thing, it will solve all the problems. And I think you have to honestly answer all three of those questions at the same time. Is it financeable? Is it, is there a real business model that works? Is it technically feasible? Is it economically technically feasible? And then also, does the regulatory thing the structure make sense? And can you actually spread out the benefits across everyone, right? If you don't drive a Ford 150 and you don't have solar panels, can you still participate? Can you still be part of the answer for resiliency? And can you also ensure that your costs are not higher than everybody else's? So I think, I do think that we have to look at things from a holistic perspective and a systems perspective. And yeah, I think, the grid is changing. We got to get ready for that. And I think it's high time that we start becoming more informed citizens, whether or not we work in the sector. So
okay, that's all I got. Thank you, Nisha.
The grid is certainly changing, and that I think is the key point that I'd like to build off of. When the blackouts occurred, there was so much finger pointing between kind of fossil fuels and renewables, and at the end of the day, because of what customers are demanding, what consumers are demanding, what businesses are demanding, there's just going to be a lot more renewables on the grid. And I think that the question about renewables kind of means, look, we have to deal with problems of intermittency. So we have to figure out ways of tackling the unexpected, like the sun going behind a cloud, or I should say cloud going in front of the sun, or the wind speeds dropping off at some unforeseen time. We do need to think about as well, how do we get a variety of resources to work, right? I think one of the beauties of the way that we do have our market design, it's designed to be competitive, right? And it's designed to allow new solutions to come to the market. Sometimes they come to the market and they fail. Sometimes they come to the market and they duke it out in this, boxing ring of a competitive market. But I think that that's really healthy, because that's where we're getting some of the newer solutions around that do help with resilience. And we just need to think about how do we get more of that, because we'll need more of that in the future.
Okay, thank you. And Oscar, a final word.
Yeah, it's not often I get the last word in, but I'll sort of build on what Nisha just said. You know, I believe the market structure should be demand requirements led rather than supply dispatch cost led. So I think that's a fundamental sort of different way of looking at it. And I don't think Texas, while it encourages inexpensive power and a variety of new players to come in, it's not effective in really delivering resiliency. So somehow through a mix of mandates, insurance, or resiliency charges or capacity charges, that has to be baked into what customers need on the demand side. Customers need resiliency, and that is not in the market system today. So I think it really should be demand led rather than supply led. And I think that will work its way through the system if looked at that way. The second point I'll make is we have to really look at all solutions together. Geothermal, CCUS, natural gas, hydrogen, batteries, solar, wind, whatever else that comes our way. I think there's a tendency today to sort of latch on to solutions or winners, pick winners, and then believe that will solve problems. But I think that's not understanding the scale of the system. The system scale is so massive that these solutions, what many people talk about, are not really either affordable or feasible in a timely way. So I'll just add that.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for an absolutely fascinating discussion. And for all of you out there, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. I think that there's so much energy around this topic. We clearly could have gone on for another hour, and really a terrific discussion, and appreciate that you could all join us. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen. Oh, you're on mute.
Gets me every time. Thank you everyone for being here on behalf of the Graduate School of Business and the School of Earth, Environmental Science and Energy, and to all our panelists, in particular, Sally, thanks for leading this interactive, gregarious conversation from our panel of experts, and lovely to see all of your passion on this subject. It gives us all hope. And thanks to everyone who attended. We will be sending a post-event email with a survey, and we love to hear everything that you have to say, all of your feedback and ideas for future programming. And we'll have contact information for our panelists and the recording from the event. So thank you again, everyone. And we hope to see you at a future event.
Thank you for organizing really fantastic event on an important topic. Thanks, Sally, and all my fellow panelists, as well as Kathleen and Nick for organizing.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Approve, Nisha, Oscar. Great meeting you all, and thank you, Katie. And I'm out to answer questions. Happy to do that.
We need to do another session over wine and cheese.
I'm about to go get that glass of wine now.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.